politics.
Yeah, except the Labour Party was established to serve the interests of the British working class. The Conservative Party functions as the political wing of the British business class. The SNP's ideological roots are much less clear, and there were attempts in the 70s and 80s by various left nationalist intellectuals to try and give the SNP a much clearer and stronger grounding in class politics. Those attempts failed, and that partly explains the current ideological confusion. But it's a question and a challenge that the SNP will have to confront at some stage. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that post-financial crisis, the neoliberal, Anglo-liberal growth model is being questioned more intensely than it has been at any point over the course of the last 30 years, and the SNP can't get away with a muffled or fudged response to that question. It has to have a coherent one.
What do you think about that, Andrew? I mean, you obviously asked the question. From an outsider's perspective, for a different party's perspective, what do you think about the kind of questions that you were asking me about?
I think that all major political parties in Britain are coalitions within themselves, but I think that what's always united the Labour Party was always that idea of representing working people, and I think that with the Tory Party, it's been united over the years by, again, broader ideas. But the SNP, I think what's different is it's been united by a specific policy rather than an ideology, and that specific policy almost has been independence. And I think that where there's going to be a difference with the SNP and other parties if people vote no, and it partially depends on how overwhelmingly people vote no, if indeed there is a no vote. But I think that then means that the whole kind of sole purpose of the party has just been, would have been effectively stopped for at least a generation.
One on counter to that, just an interesting point, just on what you were saying about the sole purpose of the party. Is there an ironic argument to be made here that devolution has actually given, in the context of, say, an unsuccessful referendum debate in 2014, it has given the SNP room to make the argument for their continuing relevance even after a potential defeat. That imagine it was, say, before 98. Say we had an independence referendum for some weird reason in 1997. You have a small number of SNP MPs in Westminster, and independence gets defeated. You know, what's going to happen then? Well, the Scottish National Party looks in a really bad way. But because we have a devolved parliament, because we have this sort of distinct political sphere and political institutions, which devolution has given us, it gives a powerful rationale for a national party to keep an interest in politics, whether or not its nationalist or independence ambitions have really been driven. It gives the SNP a rationale which may save it, actually, after 2014's rather early confrontation with the sovereignty question.
Working as a buffer, effectively.
Yeah, well, in a very ironic and perhaps unexpected kind of way.
The SNP, well, following a no vote in 2014, approached the 2016 Scottish devolved election with a platform of massively enhanced powers. The SNP will outbid, as Rob McAlpine suggests in his piece today, they'll outbid the unionist parties on more powers, and I suspect that they'll be re-elected on that perspective.
But there is a counterpoint, which is that there will be large numbers of people in the SNP who will feel that the party is compromised over the years, whether it's over things like NATO or monarchy or points like that, who may well think now is the time to clean out the dirty laundry, now is the time to really air out these debates. I don't really know very many people in the SNP, so I suppose that's a question as much for you three as it is me providing.
Well, I think there's absolutely no question that following an unsuccessful referendum campaign, there will be people at the top of the SNP, perhaps including Alex Salmond, who will have to reconsider their position. I think there's a fairly strong generation which could succeed them, with Nicola Sturgeon at the head of that generation. But yes, the NATO debate upset a lot of people in the party.
I think I wouldn't want to understate what you were saying there, Andrew, about these potential divisions, because as I was saying before, there's not necessarily that ideological coherence underlying even an underlying ideological mythos which might bind you together whatever you do. I mean, the continuing life, such as it is in the Labour Party, is a lesson to us all in how far a kind of political outfit can maintain itself in the face of reality. But I think that's perfectly possible for the SNP too. But certainly, it will be an unsuccessful referendum would be an event which would put immense pressure on the political structures. But I personally think that the pressure will be to keep the show on the road, keep the boat sailing. Personally,
but to keep Alex Salmond and Angus Robertson.
That's being circumspect. That's probably a question I won't answer on today's podcast.
Okay, and I think that's a good point. Just to go on to last little topic, I don't know if you had any thoughts about the funeral this week. I watched it online, but I turned my back on the online video. I don't know if you actually, if any of you watched it.
I watched it, yeah.
So we had it on in the background at work, because I work in a press office, and we were trying to get positive news coverage for people we worked with, but there was no chance of getting anything in the papers that day or anything on television that day. So we had it on in the background, and it was just all consuming. But the key part which stood out for me was that David Dimbleby at one point said that it was a gathering of lots of her close friends and allies, and then suddenly it cuts to Michael Heseltine.
Never let it be said the BBC cameramen don't have a sense of humour.
And George Osborne greeting as well.
Oh, yeah.
He's just been handed the bill, apparently. I watched it and was as appalled as everyone else. I thought it was a festival of grotesque militaristic pageantry and all the rest of it. It did occur to me, though, that there will be some people who watched it and thought this is Britain at its most dignified. Those people will be called conservatives. And I think they must be living in a completely alternate, warped reality to the rest of us, because it was, most of it, frankly, just weird.
Yeah. My favourite thing in the whole story has been the thing about some people thought, because there was a hashtag, now Thatcher is dead, and a lot of people read it as, now that Cher is dead. I just thought that was marvellous. It's brilliant.
We all know that Cher will never die, because she's mostly made of plastic these days. She defies the tooth of time.
There was a serious point during the funeral where scrolling along the bottom of the screen was that unemployment had just increased by 70,000 in the last quarter. And that was when that was scrolling along the bottom of the screen while we were watching Thatcher getting buried on top of it, that it really underlined that we are still living with her economic legacy now, and that decisions made in the 1980s are still affecting us now and will for many years to come. And it's that cliche about a generation being Thatcher's children, and undoubtedly it's true. And one of the transformative effects of Thatcherism is that we're still living with the same neoliberal economic policy which was pursued in the 80s, and has been unfortunately fairly unreconstructed since then.
I think the most damaging impact Thatcher had was the most damaging policy Thatcher implemented was the start of the financialisation of the United Kingdom economy. The problem for those of us on the yes side of the debate in Scotland is that the SNP is far too close to Scottish finance capitalism and subscribes far too much to the Thatcherite neoliberal consensus to be able to really launch any meaningful critique of that legacy.
Do you think that next generation that you talked about would be any different?
I think Nicola Sturgeon's social democratic instincts are much stronger than Alex Salmond's, or at least, I don't know, perhaps that's not a fair comment.
Andrew, you're very close to the SNP. How do you feel about that? Mr. Tickell.
Really, I'm very close to the SNP. That'll be news both to me and to the SNP. What do I feel about what? What particularly would you like me to answer?
Well, because of what you said about your family, the big SNP family, and you do have an SNP logo on your avatar. To be fair,
I am a party member, so I cannot declaim on that front.
I mean, the next generation of the party.
Yeah, I think that Nicola Sturgeon is a woman I admire a lot. I helped a bit on her campaign when she was fighting the last Hollywood election, and was very happy to do so. And I know lots of people across all different parties actually find Nicola Sturgeon quite an admirable figure. I think, though, she is somebody to an extent who's quite projected upon, and that Jamie's reference to her her more pronounced social democratic sensibilities as compared to Salmond is in some ways actually not very easily evidenced. If we think, well, what's the basis for that? Point to me to something specific that she individually has done. To give it that, I'm not saying she doesn't have these instincts, and that's not her politics. It's clearly that is her sort of overall position in the milieu. But thus far, I think she's a bit inscrutable because she's never really been in a political role, which is required to make these kind of harsh, sharp, edgy leadership choices in quite the same way.
She was health secretary, and as health secretary, she committed the Scottish Government very clearly to an integrated Scottish National Health Service. And she said there would be no attempt under SNP government to introduce any more private finance into the provision of health in Scotland. So I think partly her social democratic reputation is based on the time she spent as health secretary, but of course it was reinforced by the speech she gave at the end of last year, which was a very a clear statement of her belief that independence is the means to a more social democratic end.
I mean, I'm not saying that isn't true. I mean, there is evidence about it. I suppose I'm saying that the words are wings. We'll see when it comes to it what people's real convictions are, because what people do in practice is often much more important than what people would say in a speech. However potentially sincere it might be.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good point to finish up for this week. I've quite enjoyed this Mr. Smith, Mr. Tickell business. It's given us quite a Victorian feel this week. It's kind of
certainly has.
Yeah, and so from Truth Team, that's us for this week, and we'll speak to you next time. Goodbye.
Cheerio.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All right, cheers then. Bye.
Truth is all there is. You can't hide from the truth because the truth is all there is. You can't hide from the truth because the truth is all there is. You can't hide. If happy times are too few and far between, it's a pity, dear. We can't erase the things we've seen. So disappear, vanish if you wish. Just go before you're swallowed up by bitterness. And the truth is, you can't hide from the truth. And the truth hurts because the truth...
Like a outtake reel just at the end of the song usually.